Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sunday afternoon, the 22nd, and today I'm going to be presenting to you the fourth lecture in our series. And this lecture, the topic for this lecture is starting, steering, and stopping your vehicle. Couple of things, once again, as I said in the very beginning, I apologize for the lack of mobility in these lectures. I really don't have any choice in that. I'm still working on, walking with this walker, and I'm hoping to get to the cane soon. So please forgive me for being so, stationary. And I'm hoping to get back to work by December 7th. And, just please keep me in mind and say a little prayer because I need to get back. I'm really bored. Okay. So anyway, having said that, the other thing I would mention, most of you have been very good about submitting your assignments, and we continue with the assignment on each lecture being due on the following Saturday. Okay. So you have plenty of time to take notes on the lecture and to answer the questions. The videos are the links. If you've tried accessing the YouTube link for the video on your iPad, some of you asked me about this, it is restricted from the iPad. However, from your home computer, your home devices, you should have no problem, okay? Mr. Amato did offer to unrestrict them, but I thanked him and I told him that, we're just going to stick with it the way that it is for now. It seems to be working just fine, okay? So we start today with starting the engine, and let me just point out that today's topics are best taught in the car, all right? So, when I say certain things today, certain things I say, you're going to say, okay, that's basic. I knew that, all right? So, just bear in mind, I have to cover all this material. But a lot of what we're doing, whether it's this unit or any unit, a lot of what we're doing is best learned when you're driving in the car with your instructor. Okay, so so please keep that in mind as we go through these things. And there are also things that I'll mention that may not be as relevant when you're in the car. There's certain things, like for instance, the first set of things that I want to address have to do with starting the engine. And, the mindset that you should have when you first get behind the wheel and you start the engine, the things that you should do, okay? So good habits, really, is what we're talking about. And we start with your foot on the brake pedal before starting the engine. Technically speaking, your foot should be on the brake before you start that ignition. And technically speaking, your parking brake should be on. Okay? Now, honestly, when you take your road test, I don't think the road test examiner is going to be that particular. You'll start your car and proceed from there. Okay? So please don't be nervous about that. Don't worry if you forget to put your foot on the brake or you forget to have your parking brake on, okay? Not a big deal, but you should do it, technically speaking, okay? So your foot is on the brake, and your parking brake is set, okay? And you're also checking your gear selector to make sure your car is in park, which it would be, okay? But again, it doesn't hurt to check that, all right? Now, of course, then you're sticking the key into the ignition, and you're turning the key clockwise. I think we all know that, okay? Some vehicles have the push button. You may have a family car that has the push button to start the engine, okay? And in that case, you'll notice that you need your foot on the brake. It won't start unless your foot is on the brake. But you'll figure that out quickly enough if you haven't yet, okay? Now, as soon as the engine starts, release your hand from the key or the button. Holding it too long could be damaging to your engine, and there might be a grinding sound. But the point is, and believe it or not, a lot of students have, a little difficulty with this in the very beginning because, and especially if I were your driving teacher, because I don't know about Tim and Guido, maybe they're doing it the right way, but I had a tendency when I was teaching driving not even to pay attention to starting the engine. You know, most of the times we switch drivers, the engine's already running, which is probably, which is a flaw on my part. I mean, technically speaking, you should practice starting the engine every time. And what I would end up doing at the end of the semester, as you're getting closer to the finish, your road test, I would make sure that, you know, you're starting the engine correctly. And, you know, I would find sometimes that students, even very good beginning drivers who've done well all semester, when I ask them to stick the key in the ignition and to start the engine, they don't do it perfectly well. You know, and what I mean by that is sometimes a student won't turn it far enough, and then they'll let go, and their gauge lights are all on, but the engine isn't running, okay? And then the reverse, students who will turn it, you know, and hold it for too long. Once you hear the engine turn over, once you hear that and feel the power of the engine, you let go. Your car is running, rest assured, okay? So it's a good idea, even when the weather is warm, to let your engine run for maybe 15 to 20 seconds before you do anything else, okay? I wouldn't race the engine. You know, sometimes people think when it's cold and you want your car to warm up, okay, your engine's running and you rev the accelerator. Not a good idea, okay? Not necessary, doesn't serve a purpose, all right? Once the engine is running, it's running, okay? So let it run 15, 20 seconds at least. Now, if it's really cold outside, you're probably going to want to let it run a little longer. And one of the things I would do if I were you is, you know, when it's particularly on a cold winter morning, when you're starting that car, if you pay attention to the needle on the temperature gauge, C and H, you know, that needle in the cold weather is going to stay firmly pointing at C for a while, okay? It could be 5 minutes or more. I would let the car run until you see that needle start to move, all right? Because it's better for the engine. You also, if the car is really cold, there's always the possibility that you get started with it and start moving and it may stall. It shouldn't, but, you know, there is that possibility, okay? Take a look at all your gauges. You know, you're going to see that, you know, that everything, you know, whether it's your gas gauge, the needle goes to where it should point between empty and full. As I said, the temperature gauge needle should be moving, all right? You know, your transmission fluid, whatever gauges are on your dashboard, you want to make sure that the needles are where they're supposed to be. And you want to make sure there are no lights, warning lights on, whether it's for low gas or whether it's check engine, low oil. You know, a lot of those lights, once you start the car, they go on, but they should go off right away. Once the engine is running, they should go off, okay? If you see any of them on after the engine is running, then there's a problem, okay? You need to get that checked out, all right? Most cars have what are called, and we mentioned this in an earlier unit, your daytime running lights. You want to make sure they are on. Now, a lot of cars today, they go on automatically in the daytime and they adjust at the nighttime. But there are many cars that don't do that, and you have to manually put them on. Okay, make sure they're on because you provide so much more safety if they are on than when they are off. All right. The last thing in terms of good habits with getting started is, especially on a cold day, it's a good idea that for the first few blocks that you're driving, you know, keep it at a moderate speed. Again, the engine is something that you want to take care of. You know, you don't want to, as powerful as it is, at the same time, whether it's an engine in a car or an engine in an airplane, it needs time to warm up, okay? And even on a warm day, you know, you want to give it a little time to get going rather than just, you know, hitting your speed and leaving right away, but especially on a cold day, all right? Now, let's talk about enhancing your steering control. Some of this we discussed already, I think, in a previous lecture. You want to make sure, as I've said to you, that your standard driving position with both hands on the wheel is 9 and 3. It's not 10 and 2. That's the way I learned, 10 and 2. But that was before airbags came along. Okay, studies show that you're much safer with the airbag if your hands are at 9 and 3 rather than at 10 and 2. Some people, particularly people who are bigger, and they don't have a lot of room to maneuver because they have bigger bodies, all right, they're more comfortable with the 8 and 4, and when you turn the 8 and 4, a lot of times the turn is not hand over hand. It's what's called push and pull. 8 and 4 and push and pull are acceptable, perfectly fine. And I've had students who weren't big who just felt more comfortable with that, and that's fine, okay? But more often than not, the standard position is 9 and 3, and more often than not, when you turn, it's hand over hand, all right? Arms relaxed. You don't want your arms stiff. And again, as I said in the beginning, I'm sure your instructor in your car is going through this with you. Your elbows pointed down, okay? You want to be comfortable, all right? Steering techniques, I just alluded to that. There really are 3 ways you can steer the wheel. One is hand to hand, one is hand over hand, and one is one hand, okay? Starting with hand to hand. Hand to hand is exactly what I said before, which is push and pull. So if you're holding the steering wheel at 8 and 4, and rather than do the hand over hand, you'd rather do something like that, perfectly fine, okay? Nothing wrong with that, all right? The main thing, of course, is you always want to make sure both hands are making contact with the steering wheel. Sometimes students take the hand off and don't even realize it, all right? Sometimes you'll find that if it's a soft turn, meaning that it's not sharp, you don't have to turn the wheel that far, or you're, approaching a curve, you may find yourself naturally going push and pull rather than hand over hand, okay? And again, with experience, you'll see how that goes, all right? But largely on the turn, most people and most students in the beginning, we teach it this way. It's hand over hand, okay? And whether it's left or right. If you're having any trouble with that, most students pick that motion up pretty quickly. But, I have students sometimes who they just can't coordinate it right away, and they just need to practice it. And I'm not talking about the turn itself. So, for instance, what I do, and Guido and Tim may be doing something, they may do it differently, okay? But I'm just saying how I approach it is my very first lesson, one of the things I do is I have students demonstrate with the car motionless, just demonstrate hand over hand, all the way to the left, all the way to the right. Sometimes, and I see right away, most students right away, they get it. Because, sometimes if you think about it too much, though, you get a little tangled. And with students who have difficulty, we practice it, that first lesson. We may do it 5, 6 times just to get them to have a feel. One hand, no. Okay? Do not ever turn your steering wheel with one hand. Okay? It's that simple. All right? The textbooks say it's not recommended. And the textbooks say, well, maybe you could do it if you're backing up, and you have a hand on the seat. Okay? What I'm saying to you is don't ever do it, because you will find yourself on a road test failing the road test if you're ever turning the wheel with one hand, and if you're ever backing up with a hand on the seat. And you don't want to get into it because, again, when you back straight up, and we're going to talk about backing up a little more in a minute, but when you're backing up your car, whether it's you're doing a K-turn or you're parking, you're backing up your vehicle, it is acceptable to have one hand at 12 o'clock, turn your body and your head, and have the other hand on the passenger seat. And as a matter of fact, that tends to be more comfortable, and you probably see better out the back window. Don't do it on your road test. I'm telling you, because a lot of instructors don't either agree with that method or they don't even realize that's correct textbook-wise. okay? And you don't want to get into an argument. And I've had, over the years, I've had students who've done that on the road test and failed, okay? So let's talk a little bit about some steering errors. You know, many of the accidents, especially with people in your age group, young people like yourself who are learning, improper steering does lead to many accidents, okay? And, you know, again, a lot of this has to do with experience. You know, you fail to make a quick turn, okay? You don't turn enough or you turn too much, all right? And what happens is the weight shifts in the car and accidents can be caused because with the weight shift comes a loss of traction. And so cars will skid, okay? So steering, of course, is very important. And it, you know, I find, and I tell students all the time in the car, that the hardest thing for me to teach as an instructor is turning, okay? You know, it would be nice if in life we can just drive the car straight all the time, but obviously that's not the case. And what I do in the very beginning, in the early lessons, is I just, you know, pound them with turns. You know, we do tons of right turns, tons of left turns. You know, I don't even worry about K-turns and parks until later, okay? Because my feeling is until you have demonstrated competency with the rights and the lefts, you know, the Ks and the parks, they don't serve a purpose. You know, K-turns tend to be pretty easy. Students usually get them pretty quickly. Parking can be tricky, and of course we want to practice that a lot. But again, I don't even go there until we've done a bunch of turns, okay? That's not to say I'm right and another instructor is wrong. You know, Guido or Tim might be having you park right away. Do K-turns. Again, methods, teacher methods vary, okay? But I think we'll all agree, you know, whoever your instructor is, I think we would all agree that turning is a hard thing to learn. So there's a lot going on. So again, if you're turning too suddenly, if you're, you know, turning too sharply, you're going to have a weight shift. You're going to lose traction and potentially have an accident, okay? One word of advice that I would give regarding, you know, whether it's you're turning or whether it's even as simple as in the beginning, you're having trouble keeping the car straight. And there are students, and you may be one of them, who you find in the first few lessons, you know, you're still, as you're driving the car, you're still hugging the right or the left, or you're still veering a bit. Okay, sometimes it just takes longer for a student to pick that up, all right? So what I would say to you is always remember that particularly for beginners, where your eyes look is where your car is going to go, okay? So if I'm driving straight, I want my eyes focused on the center of the lane that I'm driving in. That's where I want my car to go. And I'm going to look, whether it's the 12 to 15 seconds or whether it's the 20 to 30 seconds. And another gauge is 1.5 blocks is about the 20 to 30 seconds. I'm going to look as far out as I possibly can. Okay, so I take in the whole scope of the path that I'm about to travel. My eyes want to be in the center of that path. So keep in mind your car, your seating position, I should say, is to the left, right? Your passenger on the right in the front is to the right. You're to the left. Neither one of you is sitting centrally. In England, of course, it's on the other side. But the point is, so you're driving on the left side, your eyes typically should be looking center and straight out, okay? You want to look where you want your car to go, which is the center of the intended path. So if I'm making a left turn, I'm looking at the center of the path that I'm turning into. Right turn, the center of the path that I'm turning into. That's why I always tell students in the car, if there's somebody on a bike, students always get nervous, especially in the beginning, because there's that bicyclist. He's fine. He's in his lane. He's riding along, and you're nervous about passing him, okay? I always tell students, don't look at him. Just keep driving. He's in your peripheral vision, and you may not even realize it, but he's in your peripheral vision. And if, God forbid, he should make a sudden movement, lose control, whatever, you're going to see it, and you'll be able to evade. You'll be able to react, okay? But if you look at the bicyclist, typically in the beginning, again, where your eyes look is where your car is going to go. Your car may go towards him, all right? So, of course, we don't want that, all right? Correction. So, if I'm making a turn, whether it's left or right, and I need to, I start the turn, I need to turn a little more or a little less. You want to make sure those corrections are not abrupt. Because again, when you make abrupt corrections, just like when you make abrupt turns, you shift weight in the car and you run the risk of losing traction, okay? And this takes practice. Please remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, all right? This takes practice even for people doing well in the very beginning. It's experience that makes you a good driver. So, you more often than not, I would say 99% of the time, by the end of the semester, I have a student who is able to look back at a month or two before as far as the turns are concerned and other things as well and say, wow, look how far I come. It clicks. It does. You'll get it. Okay? But it does take practice. All right? Remember, when you're driving, you always want to have a feel for the road. And this, again, comes with experience, a road feel. So, if you're approaching a bumpy path, you're going to feel the vibration of your steering wheel. And you want to adjust to that. You may have to grip the steering wheel a little tighter. Again, you may have to make adjustments in the steering if your car veers one way or the other because the road surface has changed. So that's what we call road feel, okay? The feel for the road. And again, we talked about surfaces, the different road surfaces. If that changes, you will feel that change as well as hopefully see it, okay? Let's talk about the brake pedals and your foot, all right? The textbook says, believe it or not, that it is okay for you to drive with 2 feet. Now, what I say is don't ever drive with 2 feet. Now, there are, big trucks where, it requires 2 feet, whether it's, there's multiple pedals. There are the, I shouldn't say never, if you're driving a manual transmission car instead of an automatic, meaning a stick shift, you need 2 feet. Your right foot is going to pivot, from your gas and your brake as normal, but your left foot is going to hit, the clutch pedal, okay? Because you have to operate the clutch. So that's a circumstance where you need 2 feet. Most people are driving automatic transmissions. You'll be taking your road test on an automatic transmission. It's 1 foot, your right foot. Your left foot is off to the side. It's out of the way. It's useless. It's your right foot, and I would pivot. And again, if you're having some difficulty with this, just think of it this way. Pivot position the bottom of your right foot right underneath the center of your brake. Okay? Pivot position the bottom of your right foot right underneath the center of your brake. The bottom of your right foot doesn't move. Your top part of the foot, where your toes are, that pivots. It's just like that. The bottom stays in position and the top pivots, okay? You don't want to be lifting your foot going from brake to gas, gas to brake. If you're doing that, what you're doing is creating a potentially dangerous situation. And that's why we say not to drive with 2 feet, because it creates a potential dangerous situation. The more movement you have of your foot, the more likely you're to interfere with the pedals. Your foot gets stuck, underneath the brake, or it accidentally hits the gas pedal the wrong way or whatever. You don't want to create more movement and motion than you need. It's a simple pivot. Position your foot underneath the brake and pivot the top part of your foot between the gas and the brake. And you want it to be firm enough, so you want your foot to be close enough to the brake. If you find your toes are you're having trouble reaching the gas and the brake, well, then you need to move your seat up a little bit, okay? So really that provides for better pedal control and of course for safety. Let's talk about accelerating the vehicle. As we said before you shift gear, you should make sure, and again, and they're not going to check this on your road test, okay? But as good practice, when you're changing gears, not only is your foot on your brake, but your parking brake should be set, okay? So your parking brake is set, your car's running, your parking brake is set, your foot is on your regular brake, and you change gears. As you know by now, you cannot come out of park unless your foot is on the brake. Okay, so, if you're trying to change gears and your foot's not on the brake, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to stay in park. And again, that's a safety, obviously a safety issue. All right. So in terms of moving forward, your foot stays on the brake. Okay, you shift to drive, then you release your parking brake, and then you signal. And I'm sure Tim and Guido are telling you that when you pull away from a curb, you want to signal left, okay? Before you move from that position, so now let's, go back to the beginning. Your right foot is on the brake, your parking brake is set. You shift your lever from park to drive. You put the parking brake off. You signal left. Let's say, you're pulling away from the curb, okay, and let's assume this is always going to be the case on your road test. You're always going to be pulling away from the right side. It's not the left side. You know how it's a one-way street and you could be on the right or the left? Okay, they're always going to have you on the right side, whether it's a one-way or a two-way, okay? And the same thing with parking. They're always going to have you parking on the right side, all right, if it's a one-way street. So you're on the right side near the curb. You've signaled left, down, okay? Before you start moving your vehicle, you must check your side view mirror to make sure, of course, nobody's coming up on your side. And you must turn your head over your left shoulder to check what's called your blind spot. And we talked about this with the mirrors. There are areas on the left and right of the car that the mirror does not pick up. And that's your blind spot. So if there's a car next to you, you may look in your left side view mirror and it's all clear and think it's okay. If you don't turn your head to make sure there's not a car in your blind spot, you have a dangerous action. And they will fail you on your road test for that. Checking your blind spots is vital. Okay? So now once you've checked your blind spots, you've pivot your foot from brake to accelerator. Okay? You gently start accelerating and you steer your car into the proper lane. Notice gently. Some students have trouble with that in the beginning. And this takes practice. Okay? In the beginning, I tell students, I'd rather you go too gently than too hard. But you get a feel for that. You're tapping you're tapping your accelerator gently, and you're not abrupt, okay? You're not revving it. Gently, so you can start accelerating from your stationary position, okay? Let's go through some terminology which you need to know. And when we talk about acceleration, there are 4 levels. The first level of acceleration is called idling. And basically what idling acceleration means is where you've lifted your foot up off the brake, your car's in drive, you've lifted your foot up off the brake, you haven't even touched your gas pedal. Your car will start to roll. Okay? I think you figured that out already. If you're in drive and you lift your foot up off the brake, assuming you're not on an incline, you're on a flat street, before you even touch your gas pedal, your car is going to start rolling. If you put your car in reverse, once you lift your foot up off the brake, your car is going to start rolling backward. Okay? That's what we call idling, I-D-L-I-N-G, I-D-L-I-N-G, idling acceleration. Okay? No gas. Then we have what's called light acceleration. All right? So you are gently tapping your accelerator all right? And you're starting to move from 0 to maybe, 5, 10 miles an hour. So it's the beginning of the accelerating process where you have minimal weight shift, if at all, in the car, okay? Then we go to progressive acceleration. So now you're moving from, say, 15 to 30. Okay, so your car has gone from, and so in other words, you're getting to where that speed limit is. All right, so we start with light acceleration, and now we go to what's called progressive acceleration. And finally, we get to what's called thrust acceleration. And thrust acceleration is now where you're moving to higher speeds. And the best example of where you'll experience what's called thrust acceleration is, for instance, when you're on the highway and you're trying to pass somebody. Okay? So he's doing 50, the speed limit is 60, you're going into the left lane and you want to get past him. So now you're moving from, say, 45 to 50 to, say, 60. That's called thrust acceleration, all right? And when you do thrust acceleration, that's where you're more likely to shift weight in the car. And that's also where you're more likely to lose traction. So it's very important, particularly when weather conditions are not suitable, that you're very careful about thrust acceleration. That you go very easy, okay? You don't overdo it because we get the weight shifts and the potential for losing traction. So we've got idling acceleration, light acceleration, progressive acceleration, and thrust acceleration, okay? Now we want to talk about braking and deceleration. And, stopping and starting, let me put it this way. Let me try this again. Slowing down and stopping does take practice. Going from a position where you're accelerating to now decelerating and getting yourself to come to a smooth stop takes practice. And in some cases, it takes a lot of practice. So one of the things that I would recommend that you do, and this is something I do particularly with students who are struggling with this in the driver's ed car, is I take them to a quiet area. And we look at a point ahead of us where we want to stop. And, maybe a stop sign, intersection, or it may just, if it's a quiet area, I might just say, okay, let's use that tree, for example, okay? We're far enough away that I can have the student say at 20 miles an hour as our starting position, and now say, okay, from 20 miles an hour, we want to stop at that stop sign. So we want to progressively decelerate. We want to slow it down, and we want to get to the point where we are completely motionless when we get to that stop sign, okay? It takes practice, and there are times in the beginning where students will stop too soon, or they'll go past the stop sign and they stop too late, all right? It's really a gentle, unless there's an emergency where you have to hit your brake real hard, it's a gentle movement, all right? Your foot gently goes all the way down on the brake, gently. And sometimes what, I tell students is if it looks like they're going a little too hard, I tell them lift your foot, okay? You may have to adjust. Maybe you're starting to get to a point where you may stop too soon. Lift your foot a little bit and then go down. Okay, gently all the way down, all right? A lot of practice, all right? And again, some students get it quicker than others. And please, ladies and gentlemen, don't feel bad if, your friend is getting it much more quickly than you. That doesn't mean your friend is going to be a better driver than you. It's just the way it is, okay? In the beginning, some people pick it up more quickly than others, all right? Don't get bent out of shape. You will get it. It just takes practice, okay? Okay, so just as there were 4 levels of acceleration, there are 4 levels of deceleration. And I want to talk about that with you, okay? The first level of deceleration is basically the terminology is really is around what you're doing, which is releasing your accelerator, okay? So when you release your foot off the accelerator, you haven't touched your brake. Your car is now coasting, okay? And it is going to slow down typically, but that depends how fast you're going. So the first is releasing your accelerator. The second type of deceleration is what we call controlled or squeeze braking, okay? And that is generally the kind of braking we all do. Normal braking is controlled or squeeze braking. You know, your foot goes down on the brake, nice and gradual, just like I talked about before, and you time it so you stop where you need to. You may not be coming to a stop. You know, you may be on the highway and the speed limit has changed, and so now you have to slow it down. Okay? That's controlled or squeeze braking, where you just slow the car down smoothly. Okay? Then we have what's called threshold braking. You don't want to ever use threshold braking, but in your driving career, you may find yourself having to do it once in a while, and it's never a good thing. Threshold braking is emergency braking. Basically, you know, a little kid is running in front of your car, God forbid, and you have to jam your foot on the brake and stop the car immediately. That's threshold braking, okay? And cars today, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but cars today have what's called ABS, which is anti-lock braking systems. In the old days, cars that were made, you know, maybe 30 years ago, there was no such thing as ABS. So what would happen is if you had to do threshold braking, you slam your foot on the brake, your car stops, your brake locks. You know, and that is a problem. You have to find a way to unlock it. You may have to take it to the mechanic. It may require, you know, some work to be done on it, okay? Today we have what's called ABS, or anti-lock braking systems, and that prevents your brake from locking. And basically what happens is, and you feel it, okay, if you jam your foot on the brake, the brake starts pulsating, you know, and what it does is it relieves that pressure, so the brake can easily just go back to where it was, all right? And the fourth and final type of deceleration is what we call trail braking or squeeze off, okay? So if my foot is, basically what you're doing with trail braking or squeezing off is to avoid extreme weight transfer, okay? So your foot now is being released from the accelerator to smoothly reduce the brake pedal pressure, okay? And typically that's going to happen in any braking maneuver, at the end of any braking maneuver. And what it does is it avoids weight transfer, okay? So for instance, you know, when I'm in the car with a student and the student is, you know, going too hard on the brake and I need that student to avoid an abrupt stop or stopping too soon, I'll tell that student, lift your foot up off the brake. Okay, that's called trail braking or squeeze off braking. So again, 4 levels of deceleration: releasing accelerator, all right, which stops the car's forward propulsion. Okay, your foot is on the accelerator; it's not touching the brake yet. Okay, you've released your foot up off the accelerator. So now you're not accelerating anymore, you're starting to decelerate. But releasing deceleration means you're not touching the brake yet. And that's the difference, and I just want to jump to number 4 again because I don't want there to be any confusion. That's the difference between releasing accelerator deceleration and trail braking or squeeze off deceleration, okay? So that's, you know, your foot on the brake is being lifted off, all right, to, to make sure that you have smooth or what's called trail braking. Then we have controlled or squeeze braking, and then we have threshold braking. Those are your 4 types, okay? Let's talk about stopping time. Stopping time is based on 3 things: perception, reaction, and braking distance. The point I'm making with all of this is that the faster you're going, the more stopping time you need, and the more stopping distance you need, okay? And let's start with perception. Perception is, the most difficult and most important step here, all right? It takes the driver a 1/2 to 3/4 of a second to recognize that something's wrong and to respond to it. Now think about how fast that is. We all know what a second is. So the human being is able to perceive a need for reaction within a 1/2 to 3/4 of a second, which is very, very quick. All right. And, there are people who are tremendously gifted who can hit, my son is one of them, God bless him, who can hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. I could only in my dreams do that. Okay. And the perception for being able to do that has to be instantaneous to the point of ridiculousness. And there are a very small number of people who are able to do that so well and can cut that 1/2 to 3/4 down so significantly that they can make millions of dollars hitting a baseball, for example, okay? Fortunately, we don't have to be quicker than a 1/2 to 3/4 of a second, the average person. But when you think about it, 3/4 to a 1/2 to 3/4 of a second is infinitesimally a short amount of time. So the human being, you don't have to be of Major League Baseball caliber to be able to very, very quickly anticipate something, okay? And then what you're doing is executing your response, and that takes another 1/2 to 3/4 of a second to react. So let me repeat that. The first 2 things that are inherent with stopping time are perception and reaction. So you're driving, and it takes you, when something's going on, it takes you a 1/2 to 3/4 of a second to perceive that something's wrong. And then it takes you a 1/2 to 3/4 of a second additionally to react to it. Now, that whole thing puts us at maybe 1.5 to 2 seconds total in terms of perception and reaction. That's, even though it sounds like a very, very small amount of time, and it is, a lot can happen in that small amount of time. A perfect example, and we'll talk about this at another time, but a perfect example is when people look at their text message on their phone. Or, you reach over to put your radio on and you take your eyes off the road for what appears to be a split second. How many accidents, and there are thousands of them, that happen during that very, very small amount of time, okay? Because you've missed the opportunity to perceive and to react, okay? So in light of that, you need to understand that when we talk about, perception time, a 1/2 to 3/4 of a second, and reaction time, another 1/2 to 3/4 of a second, put that all together, that's assuming that your driver is in good health, that your driver is not under the influence of alcohol or drugs, that your driver is attentive to the road, that your driver has had sufficient sleep. Okay, and again, all of these things we're going to talk about in depth as far as the condition of the driver. But, we're talking about somebody who's healthy, somebody who is not under the influence of any kind of drug or alcohol, somebody who's well rested, and somebody who's paying close attention to the road, as you should be, in order for your perception time and your reaction time to be within that 1/2 second to 3/4 of a second for each, all right? So it's very important that you keep that in mind. Some other terminology, of course, and if you've taken, in terms of slowing down and stopping, if you're taking physics, many of you are, you know that friction is a force that's really created by the surface, between the surface and your whatever it is that's touching the surface, in this case our tires, okay? When you apply your brake, what you're doing is you're increasing the frictional force. And by increasing the frictional force, you're slowing the car down and eventually stopping. And it's that frictional force that stops your car. Understand, and we've mentioned this, understand that substances on the road will affect your traction and will affect, therefore, the frictional force. And that's why when there is ice, or when there is oil spills, or whatever it might be on the road, that's going to affect the traction. It's going to affect the braking time and distance. Okay? Vehicles equipped with anti-lock brake systems, and I talked about that a little before. Basically, your ABS, anti-lock brake system, is they're sensors that detect when the wheel stops turning or locks up. Okay? And that typically happens when you've gone to the point where you are, you are threshold braking. You're braking an emergency situation, okay? And basically what the anti-lock braking system does is exactly what it says. It prevents your brakes from locking, all right? The sensors absorb the pressure that you're applying. And by doing that, it takes away some of that pressure while at the same time not affecting your slowing down or stopping. Okay? In terms of braking, your accelerator, your signaling, okay, all of the devices on your car, understand that each car may vary in sensitivity. Students will tell me, I was driving with my mother and her car, you barely touch the brake and the car stops. This car, you have to press it harder, okay? Or, the signal was located somewhere else, or it makes a different sound, or it looks different. The lights are in a different location. Every car varies in terms of these things. You need to be very familiar with the car and comfortable with the car that you're driving. And at the end of the semester, students will have the option of either paying to use the school car or using your family car to take your road test. And you want to be comfortable, whichever car you're most comfortable with. Okay. Now, as far as signals, in the old days when I took the road test, they required not only that we use our turn signals, but also that we use hand signals, and you had to know what they were, okay? And yet, you had to demonstrate them. You're fortunate, they're easy enough, but you don't need to use them on your road test. But it's a good idea to know what they are because, God forbid, your signals stop working for some reason. And it's very simple. If I'm about to make a left turn, stick my arm straight out. Simple enough, right? If I'm about to make a right turn, my arm goes up like this. And that tells the person behind me that I'm going to be turning that way. So the arm goes up like this. If I'm about to stop, and remember, your car has brake lights. So whenever you hit your brake, there are lights that go on in the back to tell the person behind you that you're slowing down and preparing to stop. If I need the hand signal, it's just the hand goes straight down like this. Okay? Straight out is the left turn. Straight up is the right turn. And stopping goes straight down. So just keep that in mind. The last thing I want to talk about with you today is, two things, and we'll do this quickly, is backing up and also, some good habits for when you stop your car and leave your vehicle, okay? Backing up is dangerous, and you really want to minimize any backups that you can. Obviously, there are times when you need to back up, when you're parking, when you're doing your K turn, okay? There are situations where you will have to back up, okay? But you want to try to avoid it if you don't need to do it as much as possible. The thing you want to do is always look in the direction that you're going. A lot of cars today have the backup camera, and we become too reliant on them. And you'll find when you take your road test, they're going to cover that, or you'll be expected to cover it. Okay, so when I'm backing up, I'm not looking at the backup camera. I'm looking over my right shoulder. Now, it's okay to turn your head back and forth, and as a matter of fact, you should. See how my head is moving, because that's going to tell me what's going on in front of the car as I'm backing up, all right? And I also can glance at it's perfectly fine to use the backup camera, but you don't want to be solely dependent on that. Remember, when you back up, if your wheel is turned to the right, or you're turning your wheel to the right, as you're backing up, the back of your car is going to the right, the front of your car is swinging left. So it always goes the opposite. Okay, so you do need to glance forward to make sure that everything's safe in front of you. Okay, move slowly. That's the key. Obviously, you never want to back up quickly. And to reduce risk when you're backing up, just a few words of advice. Okay, the first thing you want to make sure of, if you know you're going to be backing up, you want to do this anyway, is obviously as you're entering your vehicle, make sure that the area around you, if you're going to be backing up out of your driveway, you want to make sure there's no kids on bikes, no little kids playing, no animals running around. Have a sense of what's going on around you, okay? Foot firmly on your brake pedal when you're shifting to reverse. You want to use, as I said before, both your front and rear windows. Your head is going back and forth, okay? Back slowly, as I said before. Remember, the vehicle turns in the opposite direction to where the car is backing up in the front, okay? And, you want to make sure that the traffic is clear. You don't want to be backing out from your driveway into the street unless, you have time to do it. So if a car is coming, you want to make sure you either wait for that car or you can safely assess that he's far enough down the road that you have time to back up, okay? Now, as I said before, when you're backing straight up, the textbook allows you to have your hand at 12, the car in the seat next to you. What I would say to you is make sure on your road test your hands are at 9 and 3. Keep it like that, or 8 and 4. As you're backing up and you're turning. And you may have to turn your body. It's okay. Turn your body a bit so you can see out that back window. All right? Finally, the last thing I want to do today has to do with when you stop your vehicle and secure it, and some good habits. Number one, leave your wheels straight. Always a good idea. Don't have your wheels turned in either direction against the curb or out. Keep your foot on the brake when you set your parking brake. Okay, and it's a good idea to set your parking brake. Obviously, make sure your car is in park. Okay, your gear shift. And most cars have the little light. You'll see it, I'm sure, in your driver's ed car. There's a little gauge on your dashboard that tells you what gear you're in, so you don't always have to just look down. You can see it on your dashboard. Turn everything off, your radio, your heat. And, there are cars that the lights automatically go off. A lot of new cars, you don't have to worry about that. But if you don't have a car like that, you have to manually turn your lights off. Make sure you do that, because you don't want to come out the next morning to get into your car, and if you left your lights on overnight, you're going to have a dead battery. So make sure your lights are off, okay? Make sure all your windows are closed. Obviously, turn off the ignition and remove the key. Obviously, unfasten your seatbelt. Check your mirrors, look over your shoulder for traffic. And, some people, you see this, you've probably already seen this on the road. They're just stupid. They open their door. You're driving down the road and they just throw their door open and expect you to be able to not hit them, okay? So look around you, okay? Keep your keys in your hand, as I always tell you when you're approaching the vehicle or leaving the vehicle, especially if you're in a dark area. Keep your finger on the panic button. And make sure you lock all doors, all right? Whether you live in the country or the city, in my view, don't even take chances. Always make sure your car is locked, okay? All right, folks, so thank you for your attention. I'll be posting later today the next assignment, which will be due on Saturday, the 28th of November. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.